useful to you. I mean, I have nothing against hedonism, don't get me wrong. I just don't think, I just want it clearly understood, you know, we're going to toot this up and have a good time, not that this is part of the spiritual quest. And the most terrifying drugs are the most harmless, specifically DMT. DMT is so like what's already in your head that it clears within 5 minutes. That's a very good measure of how toxic a compound is how fast can your body identify it, deanimate or dealkylate it, and return everything to equilibrium. Psilocybin you come back into focus after about 6 hours. Ayahuasca, which uses DMT and an MAO inhibitor, it turns over in about 4 to 6 hours. So what bothers me about all these new drugs is that they are escapes from the obligation to do strong drugs. I think that the great popularity of cocaine is because nobody ever disgraced themselves on it, you know. Nobody ever started babbling about how much they regretted what a jackass they were. And that's what these psychedelics do. They make you get down and grovel in the dirt. God, I had this trip in Hawaii that was just horrible, you know, where it was saying, you know, you think you're such hot stuff, you won't even get off your ass and go shit in the field. You know, I want to see you grovel, man. You sit up in front of all these people and pontificate on how it's all put together. Face me now in the darkness and tell me how it's all put together. I just hate it, you know. It puts me through the ringer. But nothing else is really useful, Adele. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you're right. The problem is that it's in my experience, it's very prone to abuse. The people who propose it are reluctant to tell you how much they do it because they know how damning that information would be about their position. I mean, I'm not talking about anybody in particular. I've just observed this, that you say, well, you're telling me your patients respond wonderfully to this and that you see the dissolution of neuroses and this sort of thing. This is wonderful. By the way, how often do you take it? Oh, 3 times a day, and you've been at it for 1.5 years. I see. You must have your neuroses fairly well dissolved by this time. It's a different issue, I think. Therapeutic compounds in, as Adele says, the correct settings, the hands of skilled therapists. God knows we all are neurotic, and that's fine. But this spiritual dimension, this ingression into these ancient, alien information fields which orient you to the bones of the planet and the plan that has, you know, the galactic plan, if you want. This is a whole different issue. I use Rupert's theory to explain to myself why the organic psychedelics are so much richer. It's just that with the new drugs, they haven't taken enough people yet. And so, to speak to a drug which no one here has yet cared to defend, ketamine. I've done ketamine a number of times, and my impression is always of this marvelous skyscraper filled with these vast Karistan carpeted rooms and water coolers every 20 doorways. But where is the stuff? Where is anything? No one has moved in. Apparently they're finding it hard to let because it's just empty. And you move from room to room, and the emptiness is a kind of ecstasy, an exaltation. I love those angularities, and and, you know, the ketamine bit. But the final thing, the final conclusion is too heavy a physical impact, too heavy an impact on the immune system, clings to you too long, and too state-bounded. And by state-bounded, I mean, how much can you bring out of it? How much can you bring out of it? Not that you have to communicate it to your friends or your lover, but how much of it can you communicate to yourself 24 hours after it's happened? The whole goal, it's a shamanic thing. It's to go to the well at the center of the world and recover the pearl and return with the pearl. If you can't return with the pearl, you're not a good shaman. I mean, it was a good try, and nobody makes it every time. But that's the bottom line, yes.
I wonder, with the idea of all of continuing being as a database, psychokinesis, land, plants, I don't know, one of the becoming secrets, that's name-based psychedelic belief, or rich.
Well, this is just a part of the history of the development of science. Right now, the hottest thing going in phytochemistry and plant product chemistry is marine biochemistry, which includes marine hallucinogens. None, so far as I know, are known from seaweeds or things like that, but there are a number of fish that are psychedelic and can be cooked and eaten, and there are amazing descriptions in the literature. There's a fish off Norfolk Island down your way that this amazing account in Hoffer and Osmond's book Hallucinogens. It was written about 1960, and this person had this vision. They visited a bronze plaque commemorating the first moon flight, and it just sounded like an off-the-wall experience. Yes, the ocean is a very rich, and part of your question is a good foil for me to talk about what we're trying to do, what Kat and I are trying to do in our day-to-day lives and how we've responded to the imperative of all this. We've basically responded to it all with the faith that the drugs of the future are in the forest primeval, that the Faustian scientists, the demonic artificers of the laboratory, the bad little boys of science will eventually understand that nature has outsmarted them, and that with these now super refined analytical techniques that can pick up just a few molecules of an anomalous compound in a substance, we're seeing that plants are far richer than we supposed based on the data derived from late 19th century and early 20th century studies of plants. Also, there are amazing hallucinogens about which very, very little is known. And even hallucinogens which are considered relatively well explored. How can you say a hallucinogen is well explored? The ayahuasca complex in the Amazon is fascinating. Appears to be not only a hallucinogen, but a curing force regardless of the visionary effect. And people are taking it as a purgative and generating states of equilibrium and good health from it. So what we have some land in Hawaii and are working with my brother Dennis and trying to bring as many psychoactive plants together there as we possibly can to grow them, to have sufficient biomass so that we can both experiment with them and also provide living plants to researchers who otherwise would have to foot the expense of expeditions to Chile or the Amazon or the Himalayas. And I think that, you see, what we found doing research in the Amazon was that it's just a tremendously difficult environment. The people are spread thinly, and consequently you arrive with 7 people at a village of 20 people, and the food supply, the psychic state, everything is thrown into wild confusion. And then when they hear that you're there to learn about the secret, unmentionable drug which the old men use to communicate with the spirits, it's very tricky to, and the notion of being able to take drugs in that situation is almost impossible. So we've taken the time and the effort to transport cuttings and seeds and rootstock to a place like Hawaii, where these things can be worked with. And if any of you have any contribution, financial, physical, or simply in the form of encouragement for this kind of a project, we would appreciate it. We want to set up a data bank that links a number of botanical gardens throughout the world, and then search the herbarium data and actually get a grip on what is claimed to be hallucinogenic, and then to separate these things out, cultivate them, provide a setting for people to take them in. I scoured India. I submitted myself to a number of different disciplines, and I think they are just the dimmest reflections of what is possible on psychedelics. I had an Indian acquaintance last year who took mushrooms for the first time. He had been practicing yoga for years and years and years, and he said, "Now I understand why they call yoga practice." So, Dawn. Oh, I think morning glory seeds are fascinating. There are two kinds that were involved in the Mayan thing. Ipomea purpura is the one with the black crescent-shaped seeds, and you have to take a lot of those, about 200 or more, and that's the one that you can find actually sold as an ornamental seed in seed things, although it's covered with poison, but you can grow them out and get clean ones. But that was the one that they took when they couldn't get the one they were really into, which is called Siltliltsen, and is Revia coriambosa. It's been recently reclassified to Turbina coriambosa. And there they only take 13 seeds. Another one is Argyria nervosa, which is a Polynesian morning glory with no known history of human usage, but actually in terms of per gram weight effectiveness is the strongest plant hallucinogen known. I mean, it only takes 8 seeds of Argyria nervosa, and if you do 10, there's a cardioactive glycoside that will really make you think that you've tied on to a rattlesnake. So it's not one to push. Yes, when we were in Mexico last winter at the cenote of sacrifice at Chichen Itza, there were blue morning glories growing, and I collected a number of seeds, and we're growing it out in Hawaii because Rupert and I have an experiment going to see if in fact the morphogenetic field, that the Mayan consciousness as expressed in the glyphs and the art and the architecture is actually resident in the thing, which you would certainly expect it to be. Many people have told me that on peyote you just can't stop the flow of Aztec imagery and that sort of thing. I haven't experienced that, but it certainly is what you would expect if you take Rupert's ideas seriously. So yeah, the morning glories are a very rich field for research.
Wouldn't there be some response from the earth or the dirt, or where you put the seed? In other words, you take it out of one.
Yes, but as I understand Rupert's theory, repetition is everything. Mm-hmm. So having grown 50,000 generations at Chichen Itza and 1 generation at Hawaii, it'll definitely be more Quetzalcoatl than Pele.
Sometimes I see mushrooms that are real thick stems and real, almost all fungus and a tiny little top, and sometimes caps and skinny bottoms, and I was wondering if they have different properties or whether they're all ground up together. It's the same trip.
Nobody knows. See, chemical analysis is not done at that level. Certainly.
Have you noticed any difference when you take stems or the tops or the thick ones?
No, there are strains. There are strains. You can notice differences, but I've never correlated it to physical size and things like that.
And also, when you're saying the properties of marijuana and mushrooms, which are inside the drug, you said 2 out of 3, and I forgot what they were.
Oh, the 3 criteria for a drug: it should come from a plant, it should have a history of shamanic usage, it should be closely related to brain chemistry chemically.
Marijuana isn't related to brain chemistry, and mushrooms are.
Yeah, see, serotonin is 5-hydroxytryptamine, and your brain is full of serotonin. And interestingly, the human brain has more serotonin than any other. Serotonin increases as you ascend the mammalian phylogeny, and psilocybin is 4-phosphoryloxy and N-dimethyltryptamine. So when the phosphorus group comes off at the blood-brain barrier, and then it's a very close analog of serotonin, and is probably antagonistic to serotonin. When you take ayahuasca with an MAO inhibitor, the it's serotonin that is being inhibited, you know.
And with mushrooms, it's similar to brain chemistry, so it's almost a healthy thing to do.
Well, no, the mushroom gets it on being from a plant and having millennia of usage behind it, and then it's sort of murky on the like brain chemistry thing.
Are there any negative implications around the
No, there have been claims that it made you age quickly. Some people find it difficult to take because of stomach cramps. All I can say about that is that next to your brain, your stomach is your most heavily innervated organ of your body. And if we're going to stimulate the central nervous system, there's no way we can avoid stimulating the nerves in the wall of the stomach. So people who have this problem, basically, they just have to have a little talk with themselves and try and work it out. There are no contraindications to psilocybin physically. However, you know, well, there's even argument about that now. The only known case of death from a psilocybin mushroom was a child who ate it, but the original sample was preserved and has since been gone back to, and it is a paneolus, but it doesn't appear to be a psilocybin-containing one. However, that's good enough for me, that one murky case, and I tell my kids, you've got to be 12 or 13 years old. In the Amazon, the shaman, he was giving his child small doses of ayahuasca, and he was 5 or... Yes, they give it to newborn babies. Although it's not clear that they give an effective dose. They sort of moisten their mouth with it. Yeah. The hivara, yeah. Right. Well, that's really my brother's area. He had this idea, which was not a traditional idea. He had a sort of a ideological conniption fit in which he had this notion at a very nuts and bolts level of how you could lock into the earth signal, if you want to put it that way, or the information channel that is coming through psilocybin. And it had to do with using your voice to harmonically cancel the interiorized tone that is generated sometimes on psilocybin, which he interpreted to be actually the sound of the electron spin resonance of the molecules. Sound is a imprecise term, but the waveform phenomenon given off by the electron spin resonance of the molecules as they intercalated into their bond sites. He thought he could use his voice to lock it in, and in fact if any of you know True Hallucinations, which is a talking book of 8 tapes that we have produced. It tells the story of that expedition and everything that went into it. And the results were ambiguous, but so terrifying that we didn't care to continue. It did appear that you could use self-generated sound to synergize and prolong these drug states, but it also appeared that you were putting your sanity right out on the line, and that we need more data before we plunge into an effort to recreate that kind of an experiment. But that was the dream, you know, to lock in the high, to get the voice and hold it, and to have all the physiological effects fade away, but keep the connection. In the way that Socrates said he had a daemon of a teaching voice, which he could refer to any time. Julian Jaynes' book on the origin of consciousness in the bicameral mind goes into this whole thing about how early primitive people may have had interiorized voices which directed them and their lives, and that it was the incorporation of that function that created the modern psychic function, which we call the ego. The ego is a trapped God, is what it is. We grew so blasé in the face of it that it became a part of ourselves. At least this is Jaynes' theory. Yes?
What kind of strategy or right program would you suggest to someone that's willing to use psychedelics in areas discussing that's involved in impressive and live in a city kind of setting? What kind of...
How do you do it, you mean? It's easy to tell you how to do it, and it's amazing how few people do it right. You do it in darkness, on an empty stomach, in silence, and alone. Doesn't sound like much fun, does it? It isn't. Yes, although to really see, psilocybin works in darkness. The visions. I mean, a full moon night is absolutely stunning on a psychedelic, no question about it. But the Mazatecans and Zapotecan Indians, all the ayahuasqueros we ever dealt with in the Amazon, it was all about getting into the hut, closing the door, blankets over the windows, dousing the light. They didn't do it alone. They did it in large groups, and it's all for himself, yeah. But if you did it alone, you were considered a shaman, I think. I think that's a lower dose. Most people who take mushrooms and claim knowledge of what mushrooms are about are talking about the 2 to 3 gram level. The game doesn't begin till you reach 5 grams. And the thing to remember when you're calculating dose, and also once you're loaded, is that it can't kill you. It can only convince you that it can kill you. So, you know, to take 6 or 8 grams is pretty terrifying. There's no reason why you couldn't take 50, 60, 70 grams. I'm not advocating it. I would never do it. But it's because of your mind, not your body. It isn't a danger to your body. In the controversy about MDMA that has gone back and forth many different ways, I said of psilocybin, here's a drug that's perfectly safe and makes you think you're dying every time you take it. MDMA, on the other hand, it never enters anybody's mind that there might be a problem, and actually they're brushing right up against the Grim Reaper. So that's a funny... And when it convinces you, when psilocybin convinces you that you're dying, there is not one iota of doubt left. It doesn't partially convince you. It entirely convinces you. And then you just go through it, you know. It doesn't always do that, but it's good to expect it to do that because you don't want to be caught by surprise by that particular deal of the deck, you know. Yeah.